Tilhas Isquinchuten Sutitskwa, hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. This is an exciting partnership with all of these key partners that has been years in the making. And many of you know our former CEO, Jamie Hipp, who is now General Counsel of the Department of Agriculture, has been trying for many years to build up cooperatives in Indian country. We're finally on the cusp of making that happen, and that is only through these partnerships. So we look forward to you joining us today and throughout the week.
Great, thank you, Toni. We'll also then turn it over to Doug OBrien, President and CEO of NCBA CLUSA.
Thank you, Whitney, and thank everyone for choosing to take some time this week. And what I think is a terrifically important conversation. It's a timely conversation. And we are at NCBA CLUSA so excited to join NAF and CDF in hosting. I want to echo Whitney in thanking the sponsors. And mostly, I just want to encourage people to really participate in the conversations in these next 4 days. Whitney did a great job of kind of framing, what the day today will look like. The agenda is available for you, but we'll make sure to do as much as we can to make sure to engage. The chat is open. This is a webinar. It's a meeting type of Zoom, so it's very open. Feel free to use the chat and be sure to be active in the question and answers. So we're really looking forward to exploring this opportunity, and we'll have a lot more in just a few minutes. But thank you very much. Back to you, Whitney, and then I'll get to share more about the cooperative vision in just a few minutes.
Great, thank you so much, Doug. I appreciate that. So we're going to move into our first presentation with Toni Stanger-McLaughlin here. Her presentation is going to be covering the vision for rebuilding Native American food and agriculture infrastructure. So Toni, I will turn it to you.
Hello, and many of you have, if you've been to our website, you have access to various reports and access to our former grantees. All of that blend into a vision, and our vision for the future on how we can improve Indian country agriculture, access to food, food security, food sovereignty, as well as protection of traditional foods. Our next few slides will talk about this vision, but you can also download our entire vision document, the Reimagining Native Food Economies report, from our website, and share that with your tribal leaders, share that with your community, share that with your state leaders, because in one of our slides, I'll reiterate this: when we improve Indian country, we improve rural America, and we all benefit. So I'm going to begin talking a little bit about what our vision entails. And largely, the vision is based on infrastructure development. Oftentimes, it's impractical and almost impossible for an individual producer or even a tribal department to stand up an entire food economy. And by saying that, I'm talking about the processing, storage, distribution, and sale goods, anything that entails the production of food. We know that Indian country can grow food. We have been growing food since time immemorial. Before the United States was the United States, we have grown foods. Each one of our tribal communities have stories about our foods and how they came to be. So next slide. Part of being able to build that hub, to build infrastructure and food security and food sovereignty, all these things that we have been talking about that are important and crucial, especially during times such as now through COVID, is through sharing that burden, the burden of building an entire food system together. And if we can do that in a regional approach, we'll lessen that burden, while also allowing our individual producers to be able to save funding, save their own dollar, be able to spend that elsewhere in developing their foods, adding value to the foods that they're already producing, because this regional approach will shoulder a lot of the financial burden. This will not be on tribal shoulders alone. Our plan entails working collaboratively with the United States Department of Agriculture, with the Department of Interior, and other agencies as well. The Commerce has funding, HUD has funding. This regional approach will work to collectively invite anyone, private or federal, who would like to be a part or a sponsor in making this happen. We're hoping that in the near future, we can focus on a single hub and a few sub hubs, and you'll see maps as we move on. So next slide, please. The approach for this is 10 regional hubs. These hubs are only going to be possible through the utilization of cooperatives. Cooperatives and food hubs are prime for Indian country. I've done a lot of studies on food hubs and cooperatives that are successful and those that fail. And one important component of why this will work in Indian country is the community focus, that our communities are based on the health of every tribal member, of every citizen of our nation, rather than profit. So when in some of these cooperatives or food hubs, during low years, non-productive years, disasters, oftentimes they'll fall apart, and it's profit-based. But because our communities have thrived for thousands and thousands of years, we've ebbed and flowed with whatever, whether it was political or environmental harm that was scaled at us, we've survived. And in order for us to thrive, we can utilize food hubs and cooperatives. And as I said, because we are community-based, I feel that we will be able to make cooperatives and food hubs a central part of our tribal economic development, both individual economic development and businesses for individuals, but also in this cooperative model, working together, specializing in your area, while also expanding the reach of your mostly rural community to be able to provide food, but also to be able to provide that economic hub, to be the driver in your community that not only serves Indian country, but serves all rural members. Some of you are members of tribes that are 638, and you utilize 638 either through the Department of Interior or the Health and HHS, Health and Human Services. And those departments that you often utilize that for are the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Indian Health Clinic. So I'm located here in Spokane, Washington, but the closest 638 clinic for me to use is on the Coeur d'Alene Reservation, and they serve all of their tribal members. And beyond that, they serve the community, and the service to the community provides a foundation in the expansion of those clinics, being able to charge for those services. So these regional hubs could potentially serve that same type of purpose, where if you're a processing plant, we see the Quapaw Nation as an example. Not only are they utilizing their own bison and their own cattle, but they're allowing other regional producers to be able to come and get their meat processed in their plant. I encourage you to go to the Quapaw tribe and look at their website and all the different food ventures that they've been able to stand up in the past few years. So again, these 10 food hub models, they're in various states that have a high Native American population, or a number of tribes within a certain geographical region. So we have our Oklahoma, Mountain, Southeast, Northeast, Midwest, Upper Plains, Pacific Northwest, or Pacific Northwest, West, and Southwest. Next slide, please. part of the reason why this is important is so often we live in these rural communities. We have a lack of access to basic things such as you're going to your local grocer. And if you're a producer in Indian country, oftentimes your food never is consumed within your community. Your food could travel 3 to 5 states before it finally returns to even within your state, let alone your small tribal community. We want to change that. We want to be able to capture the dollar value and its fullest within your communities. And these food hubs and cooperatives are a method to do that. We want to create the markets and the use. We already know that we have the need in our communities. Oftentimes, our elder care facilities, our schools, our preschools, and our casinos are getting food from all over internationally, even, and not from your local community. And within the Department of Agriculture, if you look at the food distribution in any country, your food box, your commodity box is what other people know it as, that those foods don't come from your community as well. That by allowing tribal producers to keep their food in their community, it's healthier, but also it means that that dollar goes, it stretches within that community. And if it's going to your local stores, if it's going to your local gaming facilities, you're saving money by not having to include transportation or third-party entities for packaging or processing. So that's part of the economic impact. But beyond that, we see that there could be a $3.54 billion return in the value of your food dollar in the creation of these food hubs and cooperatives. Next slide. The economic impacts are going to be huge. A lot of people, if you've heard me speak in public, you've heard me talk about how when you Google, if you're in a state, Google the exports, Google the number one commodity, the number one agriculture commodities in your state, and then look at the dollar value of that. So I'm in Washington State, and a few years ago, I was doing a presentation, and many of you might know we are the cherry and apple capital of the world, and a majority of that is grown on tribal land. We have a significant number of that being grown on the Colville Confederated Tribes Reservation, as well as the Yakama Nations Reservation. We are both large land-based tribes, and more importantly, we are tribes that come with water rights. So all of that, a lot of that is being grown in our community, and it in the annual cycle of what that is worth, it's in the billions. But if you look at our communities, do you see that we are billionaires? Do you see that our tribes are the backbone of their tribal budget is in agriculture? No, we are leasing this land out, and we are getting a small portion of what others are able to produce using our land and our water. So the impacts of being able to recapture that are even strengthened through our cooperative method, our voice in leasing. If we could come together in leasing cooperatives, we can strengthen the dollar value of what we will ask in those leases. A lot of us have recaptured our authority to generate those leases on our own behalf without having to go through the Department of Interior, the BIA, and by us collectively unifying, we'll also be able to strengthen our voice in policy changes, such as making sure that what is required are what comes to fruition in a leasing contract entails a higher dollar value, especially when it relates to the difference between idle land and agricultural land, or add a specialty crop or organic label to the land that's coming from, and the value of that land should go up. And in particular, the value of our inherent water rights that come with that land. So I'm going to go to processing, packaging, and transportation, which are big parts of our overall vision on how we can strengthen Indian country agriculture. Oftentimes, and we've seen this especially during COVID, the lack of access for processing Many tribes don't do their own packaging, and then the transportation can be an incredible burden to get your product to sale. By us creating these food hubs and sub hubs, the numbers below are some of what we believe we could provide back into Indian country, the savings, but also the profit. So the potential return in these are $9.4 billion over the next 10 years. Next slide. The potential value in native food and agriculture sectors, if you look down below, you'll see some of what we could capture. A lot of these they're preliminary. We don't know all the numbers yet, and as many of you are aware, the agricultural census and the census in general don't adequately capture the amount of Native American producers, but also the amount of land. Many of you are aware of the Cobill case, and through Cobill, they have had a lot of tribes that have started to, when they did their land buyback, a lot of that land is designated agricultural land. So we know, given the most recent ag census data, which is 2017 data, since that time, millions and millions of acres have gone back to tribes, have been consolidated, and much of that, as I said, is agricultural land. Despite not having those numbers, these are estimates of what we have right now and the potential economic impacts per those types of production. So and by us being able to do our own packaging, that is a profit that we will be able to keep within our communities. So this economic impacts, if you look at the bottom of this chart, it reaches $4.5 billion, put this potential value in agriculture alone. Next slide. The hub brick and mortar costs, again, these are estimates, but given all of the funding that has gone out recently for COVID, and there's also infrastructure package funding that's getting ready to come out from the United States federal government across various agencies. We hope that tribes can band together, create these cooperatives, and create these regional hubs by utilizing as the backbone of some of this, that federal dollar, and leveraging their own funding as well as coming in with private funders so that we can meet these numbers to create these. Again, as I stated, we're hoping that we can utilize one of our tribes to create the beginning of what would be a hub and a sub-hub. So we're looking at various tribes throughout the country, some of which utilize COVID funding to create a facet of what would be in that hub. We know many tribes, well, a handful of tribes were able to create their own meat processing plant, but we also know that tribes were able to use some of that funding for other infrastructure development, whether it's broadband, water, access to water, or cold storage, transportation. All of that can be parlayed into what would be this larger hub. And these are just some of the numbers. You can take a look. For those of you that are calling in, the hub brick and mortar cost, we've done this in a scale of 10 years. And with 10 hubs, and the cost per hub is just over 38 million. So, and that will, as I said, some tribes and some of our regions are already utilizing funding, so that could reduce the amount of initial costs because they already exist. We have a few tribes that have meat processing plants. We know a number of tribes that are at the cusp of shovel to the ground on their own processing plant. But also, when beyond meat processing, we have tribes that are working in processing their fruits and vegetables as well, grains. So again, roughly 38 million, just over 38 million per hub. Next slide. Operation of these hubs, they have to have physical and what we call also capital. your physical capital, your tribal employees, and those in the and experts and partners, our educational institutions, everyone can band together to provide services in one way or another. But when we get down to how much we estimate it will cost per hub in operations alone, and that includes staffing, maintenance, food safety, and distribution, we're looking again from 1 year to a total of 10 hubs over 10 years. And for 1 year of operation per hub, it's just over $4 million for operating. And again, that includes staffing, maintenance, food safety, and distribution. Next slide. So this map shows you what the reach would be with those sub-hubs. Some tribes will have a specialty in one area or another, or they already maybe have cold storage, something that would add to the various hub within the main hub within that region. We hope to touch much of the country with these hubs and sub-hubs. Next slide. Investments in the sub-hubs, those will cost money as well. And the desire for those sub-hubs will include that there will be a community garden for every tribe, and will include asset mapping, distribution infrastructure, food processing infrastructure, operations and maintenance, and also traditional foods. And those traditional foods don't have to be for production. They could be those sub-hubs and regional hubs. The infrastructure in those facilities could be used just for protection and propagation of those traditional foods or seeds. And that cost per sub-hub is around just over 18 million. Next slide. The financial infrastructure and our external partners. Again, there are a lot of federal partners out there that you may not know could provide some type of assistance in your infrastructure development. When I worked at the Department of Agriculture, I was stationed in New Mexico, and we had in that funding cycle, there was a set aside for tribes for water infrastructure. And of all the Pueblos and the Apaches and Navajo, only one tribe was applying for that set aside, because the Pueblos and the tribes in that region didn't know about that funding. You and your state will have a lot of set asides that exist. And if they don't get used in your state, oftentimes they'll go to a national pool. And if they're not fully exercised in that national pool and exhausted, then they're open up to everyone, and you lose that special set aside. So we're hoping over the next few years to be able to provide our hubs and our grantees information on all the federal services that exist and expanding on those. I remember being in a meeting one time with HUD, and I didn't realize that HUD had community facility funding. I thought it was single and multifamily housing alone. The same with commerce. There are a lot of agencies that have funding that we could use creatively to leverage in building out these cooperatives and hubs and sub-hubs. So if you look on this screen, we have USDA, Treasury, Commerce, Farm Credit, Risk Management, and the Farm Service Agency. And per hub, you're looking at 173 million that we could potentially leverage and access to help further building out these hubs, these 10 hubs. Next slide. Okay, generational indigenous agriculture, Gen A. So this goes back to when I'm talking about human capital. And human capital and the potential of these sub-hubs to bring in our youth and those actually in any sector who decide to pivot and go back to agriculture. And when I say agriculture and human capital, I'm not just talking about you being on a farm and shovel to the ground. are being on a tractor. I'm talking about those like our staff member who help create these slides, Whitney. We need those that are in the digital space, in marketing, in various commerce, we need more ag economists. And these hubs will be able to employ those in various areas, all related to the success of agriculture and supporting our farmers and ranchers that are in the fields. But ultimately, this human capital and access to generating more capital in our communities overall, it will include capital access for Native and new beginning farmers, agricultural resources and management scholarships. Those already exist through the Cobell Fund. We hope to include more funding for students that want to go and pursue vocational, traditional 4-year or advanced degrees in agriculture. We also know the importance of our youth traditional food programming, and making sure that traditional foods are included in whatever we do. Also, emerging entrepreneurs and career experiences. Next slide. Commerce and entrepreneurship. Again, we want to include more funding for individual producers, but also our tribes. And our hubs generally working together in cohort can create new markets because we'll actually have enough of, maybe we'll say rice or bison, when we come together collectively, that we can sell on the open market should we choose to. Next slide.
I also want to just make one point here, Toni, that I believe that also all of these charts that are available on this presentation are available in the vision document that's available on our website. So you can find that link, I believe NCBA CLUSA, I believe Liz shared that link. So if you wanted to reference some of these charts, you can do so through that.
Okay, we're going to go through some of these slides quickly. We're running out of time. So again, Indian country has been dealt with and had to face on climate. And so we want to make sure also, because we have been stewards of this land since time immemorial, we're at the forefront of climate and conservation. That's also part of this overall vision plan. Next slide. Research and extension, including our tribal colleges in this, building up our tribal colleges so they can be the foundation or backbone to some of the scientific research that our statistical research that we currently gather from larger universities, and strengthening the partnerships between those larger universities and TCUs. Next slide. Next slide. Our key partners is the next slide.
Oh, I apologize. I don't know if we may have lost Toni's connection here. Sorry, Toni. What we will go ahead and move on to. I want to remind everyone, if we can get her back soon, we'll have some time here if you have any potential questions. So what we'll do is we will actually move on to our next presentation. I want to remind everyone that these presentations will be available online following the event. So we can make sure that those are sent out to everyone and we can reference those, and we'll try to get Toni back here shortly. But with that, I'm actually going to go ahead and turn it over to Doug OBrien, President and CEO of NCBA CLUSA. So Doug, I will let you talk a little bit more about the power, reach, and potential of cooperatives.
Whitney, thanks so much. And I look forward to having Toni back with us. I think she did a fantastic job of laying out the vision of a new food system that is truly more sovereign, more secure, and that benefits the people in tribal communities. And in just a little bit, we're going to hear from Dr. Murray Fulton about kind of getting a little bit more into the weeds on how the cooperative business model could be used by tribal communities to bring this vision forth. And he'll be talking about cooperatives and agriculture in the history and the potential. What I wanted to do in the next, and I'm going to do it quickly, but I did think it was important. We thought it was important as we put the agenda together to just kind of set a frame of what cooperatives are, capable of, what they have done at scale here in the United States of America and beyond, and really talk about why people have used cooperatives, what the benefits are, and what some of the impacts of cooperatives can be when people choose to use this business model. Next slide. So again, so thrilled to host and to join NAF and CDF. Whitney did a nice job of describing our two organizations at top. So we'll go to the next slide. So just wanted to pause here for a second and talk about that cooperative difference. Like, cooperatives by some measures are simply a type of business. They are a corporation, but they're a very special corporation. When people hear the word corporation, many people think of that type of business that is owned by outside investors, controlled by outside investors, and at the end of the day, exists to provide profit, to those outside investors. Co-ops are much, much different. Co-ops put the members or the users of the business at the center of the business. What does that mean? It means that co-ops are user owned. So the people who use the business owned the business. Co-ops are user controlled. They're controlled through small d democratic governance. So it's one person, perhaps if it's a type of federated or another type of co-op, one entity, one vote. So no matter how much investment a person has or an entity has into a cooperative, all have one vote. That has some huge governance implications. And the final thing is cooperatives benefit the users. So in a traditional C corporation, the profits, that margin goes out to the people who invest. In cooperatives, that profit, many times in cooperatives called a patronage dividend, that goes back to the people who use the business, those members of a cooperative. If there are savings, then the members are the ones who capture those savings. I think, Toni was talking about that potential to capture more wealth in Indian country with the amazing assets that already exist of land, of water, and most importantly, of people. Co-ops provide a tool, and it's a tool that we know about. It has gone to scale. You see some of those brands there. Some of you probably know that, that these are cooperatives. There may be a few surprises there. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'll mention Organic Valley that over 25 years ago, and we're going to hear from one of their vice presidents later on this week about their story, about how to empower farmers with a special set of circumstances and challenges and the success that they've seen. We see CHS, it is the biggest cooperative in the United States, owned and controlled by farmers across the country, primarily in the upper Midwest. Ocean Spray, REI is a consumer cooperative, right? That's a business that's owned by the people who buy things, who consume things. Food co-ops are another great example of consumer co-ops. The one right above REI, that's the logo for the Federation for Southern Cooperatives Land Assistance Fund. The Federation for Southern Cooperatives, we're going to hear from their executive director later this week too, Cornelius Blanding. They're a cooperative made up of primarily farmer cooperatives of Black farmers in the Southeast. They've been around for 54 years and have been a critical tool of resilience and economic opportunity for people in that part of the country. Next slide. So cooperative impact, I'm gonna go quick. Why co-ops are formed. They have to solve a problem. And it needs to be a problem that is, somewhat common across the members. And that's why I think Janie Hipp, a dear friend of mine for 25 years, and many others are thinking about cooperatives as a possible strategy, to reimagine the food system. Cooperatives address market failures where neither the private sector nor the government provide, those types of opportunities. They help small players get together and gain scale. That's gain scale so that they can, on a marginal basis, reduce the cost of whatever they want to do. It's to gain scale to be able to sit across the table from larger players and have some closer to equal bargaining power. And importantly, it's to gain scale in business sophistication, to be able, in these days especially, to be able to deal with knowledge, with data, the way to interact in the market successfully. By working together, you can get to that scale and do that. And finally, cooperatives give people a deliberate choice of the enterprise to better meet their common needs and aspirations. By that, people who are really focused on making sure that the community is the one that benefits from the business, as opposed to outside investors. Co-ops provide that opportunity. Next slide. Just a map very quickly. This is, I think it's 2017 numbers. This map that University of Wisconsin put together for NCBA CLUSA a few years ago. So these are where cooperatives are in the United States. You'll see every state has cooperatives. Blue are agriculture cooperatives. And you can see there's certainly a concentration in the upper Midwest and down through the plains. But they are interspersed across the country, then over in California as well. The red dots are financial services. Those are credit unions primarily. Credit unions by far are the cooperatives that are most prevalent across the United States, and then agriculture and rural electric cooperatives as well. It's about 65,000 cooperative establishments across the United States. Next slide. So in the economy, just a few data points very quickly. 2 million jobs, creating more than $74 billion in wages here in the United States, revenue of over $650 billion. Again, these numbers are a few years old, so almost certainly they're quite a bit bigger. This is I think an unknown, the next bullet point. Many public entities actually come together in cooperatives to purchase their goods and services. So counties come together, hospitals, charter schools, they come together in cooperatives to purchase, to get to scale, and to do the logistics to make sure that's done efficiently. Nearly 1 million of the nation's farmers are members of cooperatives, and the majority of all ag sales at one point or another, those commodities are handled, processed, distributed by cooperatives. And then finally, cooperatives aren't only here in the United States. They're used throughout the world, 3 million co-ops globally, and many of them, and there are examples, that we may allude to over time, many of them in indigenous communities across the world. Next slide. The benefits of cooperation, very quickly, you can see them there. They are more responsive to the member owners. The governance structure is such that, as I mentioned before, the members they control it through, typically election of a board on a one person, one vote, for major moves of the co-ops, depending on what major means, to the co-ops bylaws, members have a say in those, if it's a dissolution or a major merger of some sort or a major policy change. The next thing, and because of that, because the members are truly in control, that business acts differently. It acts in a way that serves the members. The next thing is it puts powers in the hands of community members. And again, not those institutional investors from outside the community. The next item there, it develops, sustains, and grows a base of people who act together through democratic structures. This is a really important byproduct and benefit of cooperatives, is that it is a leadership development tool as well in community. Many places in rural America, when you look at those leaders in those communities, as much as not, those people were brought up through the cooperative structure and learned how to lead people, how to lead business, how to bring community together through those structures. And finally, they're rooted in the cooperative shared values of equality, equity, and solidarity. Cooperatives do have an identity. It's defined through the International Cooperative Alliance with a set of shared values and principles that we'll allude to probably over these next 3 or 4 days. I said at top that they're a type of business, which they are, but they're much more than that. They are a way of engaging in community and a way of engaging your members. Next slide. So thank you very much. I just wanted to share some of that. We're looking forward to the conversations in these next hours and in the next days as we explore this opportunity on how cooperatives can help Native Americans redefine and reimagine their food system. So thank you. Back to you, Whitney.
Great. Thank you so much, Doug. I appreciate that. I do want to take a brief second to maybe turn back to Toni. If we have a moment here, Toni, do we have you back on board? Yes, we do. Perfect. So I'll give you a minute here to just as a final point.
As I said in the chat, and for those of you that maybe aren't on screen and calling in, we're dealing with fires in the Northwest, so in and out with my service. But as I was going through these last few slides, ultimately our goal is just to make sure that Indian country, our tribal producers and our tribal governments are at the forefront of decision making. And as Doug said, that is a method we could use in the cooperative structure to make sure that those decisions are made by our individuals, our community members, our citizens, and those that we choose to participate and join us in this venture. Our contact information is on the slide, nativeamericanagriculturefund.org. We have a number of reports, but also a number of highlights on those that we're currently granting. And if you look at who we currently grant, that those could be the beginning of a relationship within your community, within your state. So there's maps and also links to our various grantees. We have an annual funding cycle that has taken place on April 1st. The last 2 years, we're in existence for 17 more years, and we provide anywhere from $10 to $15 million annually, and that those funds can be used for creating the cooperative, for adding to this regional infrastructure model. So again, I encourage you to go to our website and join some of our social media outlets, but also go to our website and join our newsletter, because should we decide to put out additional funds throughout the year, that's the first place you'll find out about it. Thank you.